Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Every Now and Then. My name is Brian Smith, and today just happens to be February 16th, 2025. A very tragic and terrible crime happened 55 years ago today. Early in the morning of February 17, 1970, military police responded to an emergency phone call, and they arrived at Jeffrey Mcdonald's apartment in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. When they entered the apartment, they found McDonald, who was a Green Beret trauma surgeon, lying apparently unconscious across his wife Colette's dead, mutilated body. Their two young daughters were found stabbed and bludgeoned to death in their bedrooms. Now, the story that McDonald gave, he told investigators that he had fallen asleep on the couch. He had awoken in the middle of the night to find four intruders standing over him, three men and a woman with long blonde hair, dark clothing, and a floppy hat. She was holding a candle, and the men proceeded to attack him with a club. They stabbed him in the chest, according to McDonald. And McDonald claimed that after a struggle, he lost consciousness. He awoke sometime later to the gruesome sight of his murdered family. He was treated for his injuries, included a very small stab wound to the chest that partially collapsed one of his lungs. A first responder en route to that morning said he had seen a woman with blonde hair and a floppy hat standing by the road in the pouring rain. She was later identified as a local drifter, a long-term drug addict, and police informant. Her name was Helena Stokely. But suspicions quickly grew that McDonald himself had committed the murders and devised a story that would conjure images of the Charles Manson killings 6 months earlier. So these suspicions were bolstered by the discovery in the MacDonald living room of a Esquire magazine issue containing a story about the deaths of Sharon Tate and several other people at the hands of the Manson family. This was, again, just 6 months prior. So military investigators began to suspect that McDonald staged the scene to suggest a struggle with a band of hippie intruders. So, fingered by police as the killer, McDonald was soon brought to an Article 32 hearing. That's a preliminary military proceeding, something like a grand jury, to determine what charges, if any, should be brought against the suspect for trial by court-martial. The case was headed by Colonel Warren Rock, the presiding hearing officer, and he declared that there was insufficient evidence to proceed to a court-martial of McDonald. He also took a very unusual step and suggested an investigation of Helena Stokely. And McDonald thought that was the end of the trial situation. He thought that was the end of it. However, prosecutors at the Department of Justice thought they might be able to get him indicted and convicted in a civilian criminal court once he left the military. Jeffrey McDonald's plea of innocence in the 1970 murders of his wife and two daughters faced a lot of problems. There were several inconsistent accounts of the events, and the forensic evidence contradicted his claims, and a lack of supporting evidence for his version of the events. As we have a more detailed look at the issues, there are several inconsistent accounts and a lack of credibility on the part of Jeffrey McDonald. McDonald's initial account of a brutal assault by 3 intruders was quickly scrutinized, and seasoned investigators found it difficult to reconcile with the evidence. The evidence didn't match what he was saying. Now, the Army Criminal Investigative Department, that's the investigating agency, found little evidence to support his version of the events, such as he said there was a strong struggle in the living room despite his claim of fighting with multiple attackers. There were cards on a buffet in the next room that were still standing. There was very little as far as tables turned over, except for one coffee table that was turned on its side. There was no evidence really of an intruder or of a struggle. McDonald's statement about his movements and clothing during the night of the murders was also contradicted by forensic evidence. For example, Kimberly's blood, that's his oldest daughter, was found on his pajama top, even though he claimed he was not wearing it when he was in her room. Forensic analysis of blood, hair, and fiber samples within the house also contradicted McDonald's accounts of his movements. Purple cotton threads, those matching from his pajama top, were found under and around the body of his wife in the bedroom, but not in the living room where he claimed to have been attacked by 3 intruders with weapons. Blood samples from his daughter were found on his eyeglasses, and blood stains from his wife were found on his pajama top. The physical evidence suggested a domestic dispute or fight rather than a random armed assault. The lack of signs of a forced entry and the fact that the house was not ransacked further weakened his account of intruders. He was a physician, and there were drugs in the home that were not touched. And his claim of drug-crazed intruders coming to his home just didn't match up to the evidence. The forensic evidence, including the presence of his blood and DNA in the victim's rooms, made it difficult to believe his claim of innocence. There were other factors also that came out in the civilian hearing that wasn't brought forth as evidence in the Army trial. McDonald had a history of many affairs with other women, which raised questions about his character and his motivations. Now, this case has been the subject of ongoing debate and controversy, with some people believing that McDonald is innocent, others believing that he is guilty. The case has been the subject of multiple books, documentaries, television miniseries, which have furthered the debate. So that's where we are at this point. So I want to slow down, go back over some of the evidence and its facts, not feelings in this case. So I want to take my time now and be more meticulous and give more of a smaller picture of that day, February 16th, into February 17th, when the investigators arrived on the scene. So on February 17th, 1970, at 3:42 a.m., a phone call to the Fort Bragg dispatch resulted in military police responding to what they thought was a domestic disturbance. 544 Castle Drive. 26-year-old Green Beret Group Surgeon Jeffrey Mcdonald lived on the post with his 26-year-old wife Colette, his 5-year-old daughter Kimberly, and his 2-year-old daughter Kristen. When EMS arrived, they found the mutilated and battered bodies of Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen. Colette was also pregnant with a child. Jeffrey Mcdonald was found across his dead wife's chest. One of the MPs said it looked like he was crying on his wife's shoulder. One of the MPs gave McDonald mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He was placed on a stretcher, and when he got to the hospital, There was no life-threatening injuries. He had a very small 1 centimeter superficial wound that was repaired quite easily that partially collapsed his lung. He claimed that in the living room he was awakened by a black male wielding a club, 2 white males brandishing knives. And he added white female in the background chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Now, as the criminal investigators were entering the crime scene, he was being wheeled into an ambulance by the medics. By the late afternoon of February 17, 1970, the CID investigators were already skeptical that the murders were the result of drug-crazed intruders. There was a lack of disarray in the apartment. There was a proliferation of blood and fibers from McDonald's pajamas in all 3 bedrooms. And there was no evidence in the living room at all of any blood or anything else other than McDonald's fibers. There was no mud brought in. It had been raining quite heavily that night into that morning. And they found it hard to believe that drug-crazed intruders could overtake a very healthy 26-year-old in his own home. On April 6, 1970, McDonald was questioned by CID investigators. He came in to get his property. He had a stereo and a TV that he wanted. And they surprised him by questioning him. And he was charged for the murder of his family several hours after the conclusion of that interview. In the summer of 1970, McDonald then attended a 6-week Army pre-court martial, that's an Article 32 hearing, which was to decide his fate. There was just not enough evidence, so the presiding officer named Colonel Rock did not hold him responsible for the murder of his family. But that decision resulted in the formation of the CID investigation team in the winter of 1970. They reviewed the original investigation. They requested that the FBI reanalyze the forensic evidence and proceeded to interview almost 700 people in 32 states. That final reinvestigation report took 2 years to complete, and it recommended that McDonald be prosecuted for the murder of his family. 1974, McDonald was brought before a grand jury in North Carolina. He had been living in California, living the good life. He was now a ER physician, had his own condo, his own boat, and was living the good life with many girlfriends. He was indicted by the grand jury in North Carolina on 3 counts of murder, and it could have been 4 because his wife was pregnant at the time. Due to several legal motions, the trial did not get underway for 5 years until the summer of 1979. In a trial that lasted 6 weeks, the government introduced over 1,000 pieces of evidence, and McDonald was convicted of 3 counts of murder. The jury took less than 7 hours. McDonald spent a year in prison before speedy trial issues garnered him 18 months of freedom. He was let go. But that speedy trial decision was overturned in 1982, and he's remained in prison ever since. McDonald has appealed his conviction in 1984, 1990, 92, 98, 2006, 2010, and even up to 2020. He first became eligible for parole in 1991, but he didn't seek this alternative until 2005. It was told that if he admitted his guilt, he would have been released, but he refused to do that. I want to go over specific details of February 16th, 55 years ago today, events that happened that day. And it started with McDonald getting off work. He worked February 16th. He got off work. He played some basketball with some office acquaintances. Between 5 and 5:30 p.m., he got home. He had dinner with Colette. around 5:30 p.m. on February 16, 1970. Colette had a class at North Carolina Extension at Fort Bragg, so she left for her class after dinner. She got home about 9:30 or so. They sat on the couch for a little while. They had a liqueur. They watched TV. They watched, according to MacDonald, they watched the Bob Hope special. They watched Glenn Campbell. They watched the 11 o'clock news, and then Johnny Carson started around 11:30. Everything seemed normal. After 11:30, Johnny Carson show started. Colette was tired. She took some medication and she went to sleep. MacDonald said that he put Kristen, the youngest daughter, in the master bedroom with Colette and gave Kristen a bottle. Again, he said he put Kristen in the bed. MacDonald watched TV. He finished watching Johnny Carson. At 1 a.m., he said 50 pages of a paperback novel. This is at 1 o'clock and after. Then he said he heard Kristen cry. He got up and gave her a bottle of chocolate milk. At 2 a.m., he finished his novel, according to MacDonald. Finished washing the dishes between 2 a.m. and 2:30. Then he went into the master bedroom. He Kristen in his bed with Colette, and he found that Kristen had wet the bed on his side. He carried her back to her room and put her in her own bed. He took a blanket from Kristen's room, and he said he went to the living room, fell asleep on the couch. This was about 2:30 a.m. He awakened to find his wife shouting, "Jeff, Jeff, help," and "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this to me?" While he's being attacked, he also said he heard his oldest daughter, Kimberly, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, 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 Daddy." He opened his eyes. He saw 4 people standing over him. They waited till he woke up before attacking. He saw 1 black male, 2 white males, and a blonde holding a candle in front of her body. Before he could say anything, he said, the black male next to him raised the club, both hands over his head. And this is an 8-foot ceiling, has a large club over his head. Somehow it did not hit the ceiling, and clubbed him with it. And he heard a female in a very monotone voice say, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." He thought he was hit in the head by a baseball bat. He said as he raised his hands and arms to protect himself, the black male hit him in the arms and the forehead with the club. So we don't know if he was hit in the forehead once or again. He fell back on the couch. The female continued chanting. He begins to fight back with the black male while 1 white male starts hitting him in the side. He grabbed the bat, he said. He noticed the bat is slippery, as if it was covered with blood. As he grabs the black male's hands and pulls him toward him, he notices the black male was wearing army fatigue jacket with E6 sergeant stripes. He also identified the black male as having hands wet and slippery. He struggles with his intruders, and then he feels a sharp pain on his right side of his chest. He looks down. He sees the glint of an ice pick blade. He wrestles his way off the end of the couch and toward the 2 steps leading from the living room to the hallway. So now he's fighting with 3 males in the hallway. During the fight in the hallway, he notices 1 white male again has a knife or an ice pick. He pushes the black and the white males away. As he does, he tears the top of his pajama top. He falls forward onto the hallway. He has a severe pain in his chest as he falls. He sees that the white female intruder is wearing high, brown or dark fake leather boots with her white knees showing above the boots. Her knees and boots were wet but not bloody. He passes out in the hallway. He wakes up at some point. The house is now silent and dark. He's shivering so much that his teeth are chattering. His bloody top, his pajama top is bloody, torn, and twisted around his wrists. He goes from room to room. He gets up and he finds that his family is all dead. He goes from room to room. He checks pulses and heartbeats. He tries to administer mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to each victim. He hears only gurgling sounds. Goes into Kimberly's room, the oldest, sees blood all over her bed. He feels for a pulse, heartbeat, finds neither. He goes to the baby's room, feels for a pulse and heartbeat, finds neither. He goes to his wife again. He pulls a small knife from her chest. He goes back to the back door, looking for signs of intruders. He goes to the hallway bathroom. He checks his own injuries. He goes to the master bedroom to call for help. He calls the Fayetteville operator. He says, "I need an ambulance and MPs at 544 Castle Drive." The operator asks him questions, his social security number, reason for the ambulance. He gets upset and lays the phone down. He goes again to check his children. And then he uses the kitchen phone again to call for help. He goes and calls the operator again, repeats his request. He waits about 5 minutes before a male answers the phone. He goes to the master bedroom again, gives Colette mouth to mouth, feels no life in her body, covers her now with a white towel, and also his white pajama top is there. He lays down beside his wife, he said, and that's where he's resuscitated by the officers. So that's the story, and he has stuck with it for 55 years. That is some of the claims of the case by Jeffrey Mcdonald, some of the evidence and some of the facts. And we will continue with part 2 because this is just too massive of a situation and very layered that we just cannot get all the information in one. But every now and then we go back in time to reflect, reminisce, and remember. And today we were discussing a horrific crime, the Jeffrey Mcdonald murder case. My name is Brian Smith, and we are history. Thank you for listening.